It's not very often that I get to review a car from an automaker that I have never experienced before. So when the opportunity came up to review a VinFast VF8, I was really excited because it's something totally new for me. So after spending a couple days with this fully electric SUV, I came away kind of impressed, but also kind of confused.
For more expert car reviews, don't forget to share our channel and subscribe so you can catch some of this and maybe even a little of that.
A lot of you might be wondering, what even is VinFast? Because a lot of people I've spoken to have never heard of this company before. So VinFast is a Vietnamese automaker who came to Canada in 2022, but they've been making cars in their home country since 2017. And the company that owns VinFast is called Vingroup. And that company has been around since the 90s, and it was started by a man who later went on to become Vietnam's first ever billionaire. So Vingroup in Vietnam is absolutely massive. They do everything there from theme parks, resorts, hospitals, universities, real estate, you name it. So I think that should make you feel a little bit better if you're uneasy about getting a car from an automaker that you know nothing about. VinFast isn't some random startup company, so you should feel a little bit better that it has such a massive backing behind it. So this VinFast VF8 was designed by Pininfarina, which is a world-renowned famous Italian car designer. And they have designed some truly iconic vehicles like the Ferrari Testarossa and the F40, but also a lot of beautiful Maseratis and Alfa Romeos, also some more normal stuff like some Cadillacs and Volvos. So their work on this VinFast, I feel like isn't their best, but it's not bad. So one design feature I do really love is the light bar that goes across the entire front end and connects the headlights. I think it looks really cool. But I do think the front end is a little bit busy, so I wish they would have toned it down a little bit. And I kind of did an informal poll of a lot of my friends, and the general consensus is that they think this design is kind of average and kind of generic, which I can totally see because it does look like a mishmash of a bunch of different vehicles. The good news is that from back here, I think the car looks great. The design is much cleaner and more cohesive. But going back to what I said earlier about it being a mishmash of different cars, this taillight looks almost exactly like what a Ford Mustang Mach-E has. So I would really like to see VinFast kind of lean into its uniqueness a little bit more when it comes to design. But I do really love this long brake light because it mimics what's going on in the front really well, and it looks really cool at night. So inside, things are also a little bit weird. I find the design in general a little bit generic as well, but my biggest issue is really with the usability. So every single function is centralized inside this massive touchscreen. And if you've never driven something like a Tesla before, this kind of interface is going to take you a long time to get used to, especially because there's not even an information cluster in front of the driver. It makes things a little bit trickier, but luckily every VF8 comes with a head-up display that shows you stuff like your state of charge, your speed limits, and your speedometer, which helps a little bit. But even stuff like your steering wheel adjustments, your lighting, and your side mirrors, you have to do it through the touchscreen, but then it forces you to use these buttons on the steering wheel to make those adjustments. And that just makes it really tricky to do while you're driving. And sometimes the system even locks you out of those controls while you're driving, so you won't be able to make those adjustments at all, which is kind of annoying. On the plus side, I do think that the menus in here are pretty easy to navigate, so you can find different functions really easily. And it does come standard with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, which helps a lot because everyone knows how to use Google Maps. The only thing that needs some help is that it's randomly tricky to do very simple tasks like tune to a new radio station, and it's very frustrating to use when you're driving. So for that reason, I'm always going to prefer physical buttons, but there are hardly any of them in the VF8 except for the gear selector and the volume knob. So practicality wise, I would have also loved to see VinFast make better use of the flexibility that an EV platform provides. So I would have loved to see a big storage compartment under the gear selector. That would make it a lot more practical, and that's something that a lot of other EV makers do. There is lots of room inside for passengers, so in the front row and in the second row, there's decent headroom and legroom, which is great, but the rear seats recline a little bit too far, which might be a little bit uncomfortable for people. Otherwise, the door pockets are really nice and big. There's a frunk. The trunk holds about 373 liters worth of stuff, which isn't amazing, but if you fold the rear seats down, it expands to over 1,300 liters, which is not bad. One good thing is that this is maybe one of the only automakers that offers heated and ventilated seats in the front and the back. The only weird thing is that there's no controls back there to turn them on and off. So if you're sitting back there and you want your heated seat turned on, you're gonna have to tell the front seat passengers to do it through the touchscreen. And that's just kind of annoying. The other thing I wanted to mention is build quality, because I know you probably have a lot of questions about that. So unfortunately, I've heard some creaks and rattles while I was driving. It was mostly due to these vents, which are kind of wiggling in their housings. So I would have liked to see a bit tighter build quality from them. Otherwise, there's quite a lot of hard plastic in here, but listen, none of those things are unique to this VinFast. Those are complaints I have with many other vehicles, and if I'm being completely honest, the build quality in here is actually either equal to or better than what Tesla can offer, so I do think that's really good news. Powertrain-wise, all VinFast VF8s come standard with dual motors, so that means all-wheel drive, and that's awesome to see because we're Canadians and we love all-wheel drive. So total system output is 349 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. And that is plenty. It's way more than enough passing power and plenty of speed to get up to highway speeds with no drama at all. There's also two models available, the Eco model and the Plus model. The Eco model has about 373 kilometers of range, but the Plus model I'm driving is rated for 412 kilometers. So those range ratings are okay and pretty average. I would have been much more impressed to see something in the range of like 475 to 500 kilometers. I think those numbers would be way more impressive and way more compelling than what they're offering now. But driving wise, things aren't perfect either, you know, like the steering is kind of dead. But more problematic for me is the fact that the braking feels very inconsistent. So it technically does offer one pedal driving and you can turn it off if you don't want it, but you can also adjust your levels of regen. So there's 3 different levels, and even at its most aggressive level, the braking just doesn't seem like it's enough. I really wish that you could use fully one pedal driving, but I find myself having to use the mechanical brakes quite often. And then when I do use the mechanical brakes, I find them quite mushy. So I was really hoping that the braking and performance would be a little bit more consistent, a little bit more precise. In a corner, it actually feels pretty decent. I think mostly because the battery is way down low, which gives it a nice center of gravity. But honestly, you can kind of hear it from all these bumps that we've been driving over. The ride is very harsh. Anytime we're driving over rough roads, I'm bouncing all over the place, and the whole thing is just not very comfortable. So I would have liked to see something a bit more relaxed and a bit more luxurious. And because this is an electric car, I should tell you about charging. So the VinFast VF8 can accept speeds up to 160 kilowatts. That should be able to get you from 10 to 70% in about half an hour if all the conditions are right. Now, those chargers are harder to find, and so I always try to preface those range estimates and those charging estimates with that little disclaimer, because most of them only go up to 50, which is still pretty good, but not nearly as fast as they need to be. And in terms of safety features, the VinFast 8 actually has a pretty impressive list, and they all come standard with a massive list of stuff. So everything from blind spot monitoring to rear cross traffic alert and a panoramic camera, all of those things are included. But the biggest highlight is probably the fact that they come standard with adaptive cruise control. So out on the highway, I've been testing it quite a lot, and it works really well, and it's also very good at communicating with the driver so you know what it's doing. The only thing I wanted to flag is that I felt like the lane keep assist was a little bit jittery and it was kind of bouncing in between the lanes. So I wish it was a little bit smoother, but other than that, everything else was great. So right now you can only buy the VF8 in BC, Ontario, and Quebec. So for the entry-level eco model, pricing starts at around $53,000, and that's before destination or taxes. The fully loaded plus model that I'm driving goes for around $60,000, again, before destination and taxes. So that's pretty comparable to something like a Volkswagen ID4 or a Chevrolet Blazer EV, and both of those offer a little bit more range than the VinFast does. So I think what VinFast is offering is kind of competitive, but I would have really liked to see either more range or a lower cost to entry to really make this a more compelling choice. To recap, I love the VF8's standard safety features, standard all-wheel drive, and its roomy cabin. I'm not a big fan of the touchscreen only interface, the mushy brakes, or the bouncy ride. I can't help but think that the VinFast VF8 ended up being kind of average. You know, it didn't do any one thing particularly well, but it also wasn't terrible. And if you consider that they've only been making cars for about 8 years, that is actually really impressive. And I know I had a lot of issues with this SUV, but listen, those are similar complaints that I have with a lot of its competitors too, so they're not unique to VinFast. I would have really loved to see them come so strongly out of the gate with some really aggressively attractive pricing, some really great design, or some really unique features to help get people on board over those more established automakers. And even though this EV SUV ends up being a little bit average, remember, that's not a bad thing.